Supply chains in the wake of Omicron. What should they expect now? I'm speaking with Per Hong. He's a partner with Kearney. Hello, Per.
Hi, Bob.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
very
having me today.
and thank you for being with me today. So, what, in your opinion, what has been the impact of the Omicron variant to date on global supply chains and specific industries as well?
Well, Bob, I guess as the old adage goes, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link.
Hmm.
And certainly when it comes to the current state of global value chains, global supply chains, weakness is evident everywhere, upstream and downstream. And we've been living through this, certainly very poignantly over the last 18 months. As relates to Omicron specifically, while there were many signs that some of the supply chain bottlenecks that we were seeing earlier this year were easing, Omicron is setting up to be yet another test of resilience for global supply chains that were
Specifically,
already under stress, and they were in the midst of a healthy process, a healing process.
Specifically with regard to global shipping, we saw freight rates, cargo rates just soar in the last few months, and capacity was, of course, at a premium. Do those problems look like they're still with us and may be for some time?
It certainly seems like that very much is going to be the case. It's not yet fully clear how serious the emergence of Omicron will be. There's still, it's clearly very transmissible. Numbers are through the roof. However, the seriousness of the disease is still under discussion. As it relates to freight and freight rates in particular, Bob, we're watching the China government's response in particular very closely.
And what has that response been so far?
Well, there were already last week a confirmed Omicron outbreak in the Chinese manufacturing hub of Zhejiang, which is home to the world's largest cargo port. You may be aware. There are tens of thousands of individuals who are in quarantine under China's strict zero COVID policy currently. Many local authorities, in the last conversation I had last week, have urged workers not to travel home unnecessarily for the Lunar New Year festival, which is upcoming in February. So further supply chain disruption is a significant possibility. What is the reason why we're watching this, as we saw earlier in the COVID crisis, lockdown measures in one country does have significant knock-on effects, both upstream and downstream into other areas. And if we start to see more widespread lockdowns in China, not only will shipping be constrained, but we're certainly to see probably yet more shortages of key manufacturing components or extended order backlogs for core products that are being manufactured, and what region that looks, how it manifests itself is uncertain, but certainly in electronics, automotive, consumer products, depending on what region's been impacted.
So as we're speaking now, just after the new year, we haven't seen a wide scale shutdown of factories in China.
We as of now, we have not. We've seen some localized examples where the Chinese government has taken measures to be able to contain those. But that's still an unknown, and we'll be watching that over the next week or two here in early January.
Because that, of course, was the first stage of the original arrival of the COVID-19 virus, was the shutdown of Chinese factories, which then had a ripple effect on supply chains all the way around the world. And even today, we're not seeing complete return of those supply chains to normal. Congestion, of course, remains a problem, and I know you're probably looking at that very closely. Do you see any relief whatsoever in the movement of cargo through major ports like Los Angeles, Long Beach, and then over the road to transfer terminals and warehouses?
Well, we had been starting to see some relief, although wait times in Los Angeles are still quite significant, well
Mhm.
over 45 days. Much of that driven also by the ongoing challenges we have in terms of labor availability and other constraints that are within the supply chain to be able to do things.
Yeah.
These are supply chain issues that certainly are not going to be resolved in the next week or two. They're not going to be resolved in the coming months. Certainly from, we get this type of question from our clients all frequently. These are the issues that we're dealing with our clients on. What we're telling and what we're working with clients on is it could well be yet another 18 to 24 months before the supply chain really starts to find equilibrium again and
Yeah.
flows fine, we return to some kind of semi-normalcy, if that's even possible
Well,
in
that's
today's day
the
and age.
question, isn't it? Because the question is whether once COVID is gone completely, and let's assume that there is a time when that will happen, will supply chains just return to normal, or did this crisis unveil some deeper problems with supply chains that were in evidence even before COVID and that are continue to be with us after that?
Yeah, I think in many ways the crisis that we've experienced has or that we are experiencing or starting to come out of, let's put ourselves in that mode, has been an accelerant perhaps to issues that we had already seen under the skin
Mhm.
of many of many supply chains. Certainly the pandemic itself is a huge disruptive force when it comes to supply chain, but we've already been seeing the confluence of economic and social and technological forces ranging from the climate crisis to cyber threats to geopolitical tensions to surging demand that was already disrupting the supply chains.
Yeah.
What the lessons learned coming out of this experience as we start to find some level of equilibrium again, I think very much is a as a shifting the paradigm of supply chain design. Let me put it that way. Moving away from what has historically been a cost centric, just just in time kind of mindset
Mhm.
to a risk centric design, which is much more about just in case and making sure that I am building supply chain capabilities,
Mhm.
across my end-to-end supply chain, not just and across the end-to-end value chain. So, it's also raised the importance of not just my own supply chain, but my supplier and my supplier's suppliers and supply chain and the impact that has across the
Right.
entire value
Okay.
chain.
So that would suggest just more immediately the need to build in more buffer stock and safety stock throughout the supply chain. But I'm wondering if long term, there's a lot of speculation about sourcing shifts as a result of this particular crisis, and they were even in the making before this crisis hit. Less reliance on China, other parts of the world, and maybe even some nearshoring and maybe even some reshoring back to the United States on a permanent basis. What do you think of that? Do you think that
Yeah,
there's going to be some long-term sourcing changes?
I think there are going to be long-term sourcing changes, long-term design changes across global supply chains, both
Mhm.
within manufacturing and distribution, in order to be able to improve resilience. Sourcing, redefining the relationships that companies have with their suppliers, and bringing some of that production potentially near shore is an example of that lever. I think
Mhm.
we'll also see more overall supply chains being set up by managing, dual sourcing, for example, or
Mhm.
complexity management in addition to just localization, because that's one lever.
Yeah,
But
no single answer really would
right,
suffice, would it? Not just
that's right.
shifting from China to the United States or China to Mexico or Southeast Asia. Sounds like a more complex solutions are called for here.
Yeah, it's much more sophisticated than that.
Yeah.
We've seen the exposure. This is a global crisis, so needing to be able to shift sources of supply and having dual sources rather than just localization, which is a dimension of it, but not only. I
Mhm.
I do think we are seeing a trend towards nearshoring, if we can use that term, but also I think where companies are moving that are some of the longer term changes that we've not seen the impact yet, but we will. Doubling down on investments in advanced manufacturing technologies, for example. Really thinking through sensing types of technologies in order to be able to pivot supply chains more rapidly. Adjusting operating models to allow for more flexible and decentralized organizations to make sure that there's a kind of a risk management that's in place is going to be a dimension of that. I also think complexity of product portfolios and how companies are managing the complexity of their products to be able to ensure continuity and resilience of supply is another implication. We've seen this manifesting in a number of different areas as companies are rethinking modularity or ability to start to more simplify their supply chains to
after
ensure
years of complexity,
after
going in
years of
the
complexity.
other
Yeah.
direction. Yeah.
Driven by
Well,
issues of availability and adaptability, because that's what's going to support us.
well, maybe it could all lead to stronger supply chains in the end. So in other words, Omicron temporary, even COVID temporary, but the changes being brought about by this crisis permanent in nature, perhaps going to be quite different. Of course, no one can predict what they are going to be, but Per Hong, thank you so much for giving us your insights and helping us to kind of get a picture of what the future might hold for us in this whole area. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Bob. It's a pleasure to be here.